Hey, Nazi. Hey, Commie. Whoa, choose your slurs carefully, 'cause you don't want to sound stupid now, do you? Good morning, Olive, Arlo, and Frank. Grandpop here in the living room in Jack's Beach on a beautiful, crisp Friday morning. It's the first day of the year down here that's cold. And I mean, it's probably in the lower 60s this morning when I went out for my eye doctor appointment. So this will be a little challenging. I had my eyes dilated and now I'm like a vampire. But I will try to get through this. So what's all this Nazi commie stuff that I'm talking about? Well, we just had a presidential election. It's the year's 2024. Today's November 15th. So 10 days ago, we had an election between Trump is Hitler and Commie Kamala. And that was rhetoric from the candidates. That's something that the candidates called each other. But the followers of those candidates did the same thing. One side were calling the other side Nazis, and in return were being called commies, or at least socialists. Now, this isn't new, and I'm going to make a case here that you should stay away from rhetoric like this. The first election that I ever had an opinion about, that I can remember anyway, was 1968. So I was 15 years old. And the Vietnam War was going on, and I've always been anti-war. In this election, it was Nixon versus Humphrey versus George Wallace. And I remember I cut school one day and went to a Hubert Humphrey rally. And I stood there, and he was going along and shaking people's hands. When he came up to me, he stuck his hand out, and I gave him the finger and called him a war criminal or a war hawk or a chicken hawk or something like that. And what a chicken hawk is somebody who's like beating the drums of war. They're politicians that are going, we need to go over there and bomb these people, but they're not going to send their kids. They're going to send your kids. And that's what politicians do. So in every election since then, since I've been paying attention, candidates were called commies or socialists or Nazis or fascists. 1980 was between a fascist Reagan and a socialist Carter, according to the rhetoric. George W. Bush, he was definitely called a fascist and a cowboy, because he was from Texas. Barack Obama was called a commie. And even the year before I was born, in 1952, Dwight David Eisenhower, who was a general who liberated the death camps, and got the troops onto Normandy Beach and all that kind of stuff. He ran for president. He was called both a fascist and a Nazi. And that's ironic, given that he actually defeated the Nazis and the fascists and went in there and physically was there. I've seen movies, movie footage from back then of him visiting, I don't know if it was Dachau, but these horrible things. They killed 6 million Jews. And it wasn't just Jewish people. The Nazis killed the Catholics, they killed gypsies, they killed gays. So let's talk about this. The rhetoric's always the same, but the candidates are hardly ever espousing any one of these positions. So here's a little background. Yeah. We are always in a world war. It's a war of ideas. Occasionally, that war turns into a real shooting war. And in a moment, we'll look at the cost to the world and blood and treasure of that. But we want to do as little shooting as possible. And the reason is because talking is always better than shooting. Let's see if I can change the dynamic here a little bit. So when you call somebody a Nazi or a fascist or, any of these things, what are you really calling them? You should know that. That's why I listed this under building and using a fascinating vocabulary, because to get out there and understand the political arena, you need to know the language of politics and the language of economics and the language of political science. I'm using the definitions in dictionary.com. So we're not going to do a deep dive into, who was Adolf Hitler and did his mom not give him enough love, and we're also not going to do a deep dive into fascism, what's the history of fascism, and exactly what it is, and what are the different nuances of fascism in different places. We're not going to do all that stuff. We're just going to look at the definition according to dictionary.com, the simple definition, and we're going to go from there. So let's now look at the definitions plus an estimate of how many deaths were caused by each of the ideas that we're going to talk about. Now, full disclosure here, if you know anything about your grandpa, you know that I'm a free market capitalist libertarian. So that's my point of view. I'm going to try to, keep me out of the discussion as much as possible. But as they say, when you drink from the hose, you're going to taste the hose. So the first one that I want to talk about, and there's 9 definitions here, is capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system in which investment in and ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange of wealth is made and maintained chiefly by private individuals or corporations, especially as contrasted to cooperatively or state-owned means of wealth. So we're looking at the definition, and then we're also looking at how many deaths were caused. It's really hard to figure that out when it comes to capitalism, because capitalism sometimes causes wars. So, you're going to add those wars in there, but a lot of times the capitalism had nothing to do with the war. So just because a capitalist-leaning society is fighting a war doesn't mean that those wars are caused by capitalism. Now, capitalism is more exploitative of other lands and other peoples in those lands, and those wars and deaths do happen because of it, but it's very hard to figure it out. Now, this is horrible. That's one of the things that people don't like about the United States, is that we go around the world and we go like, okay, we're in charge. We're the bullies, and we want you to be like us to a certain extent. And we're going to come in, we're going to take your natural resources, we're going to pay you, as little as possible, because that's what capitalism's all about. And so you show up somewhere, you steal their resources, essentially, in their eyes, and make the population into serfs, or worse, slaves. And there's a certain amount of truth to these things, but we're looking at it from the eyes of the people that are there, and our ships show up, and the next thing you know, there's all these people that are walking around going like, okay, we're changing everything here, and you work for us now. Now, sometimes over history, they would actually take people and remove them and make them actual slaves in their own countries or other countries around the world. A lot of the countries from Europe, the old empires from Europe, were involved in the slave trade. Our country was certainly involved in the slave trade. And I'll say this, I mentioned that from the point of view of the people, that they were serfs or slaves. And I would imagine that there were times that they actually were serfs or slaves. We have a history with slavery, and it's, we fought a civil war over it. And in that civil war, 620,000, between 620,000 and 750,000 soldiers were dead, along with an undetermined number of civilians. So maybe it was like 1 million people died over slavery. But to be fair, most of the bad things caused by capitalism are actually caused by a derivative of capitalism, which I'm really not a big fan of. And that is crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is an economic system in which success in business is obtained through relationships to people in political power rather than through competition. So capitalism, the capital, the money is provided by individuals and corporations, but they're free. And so if two different people are building, whatever widgets, whoever makes the best widget for the best price is going to make the most money. But in crony capitalism, the people making inferior widgets may know somebody in Washington, D.C., and just say, okay, I need you to get me this contract. And so the government buys a lot of stuff. And so now you have this one company, they make a better product, but they're not getting any money. And this other company that makes an inferior product And they've just gotten this big government contract. And now it's like, okay, we're the ones with the government widget contract, so you should buy from us. And the general population starts buying their widgets. And that other company goes out of business. That's a bad thing. That's bad all the way around. We live in a meritocracy. And so everything that you do should be based on whoever does it the best wins. That's, and we're not really talking about survival of the fittest, because that's what people will say, pejoratively. They'll go like, yeah, you're like Darwinians, right? No, it's just that whoever makes the best product at the best price should win, because people are going to try it and go, hey, this one's better than this one, and it costs less. Or this is so much better than this one that we don't mind that it costs more, and we're willing to pay that for the quality of it. So now let's get on to the other ones. Socialism. Socialism is a theory or system of social organization that advocates the ownership and control of the means of production. So now we're getting back in capitalism. The means of production was individuals freely negotiating, entering into contracts, and buying stuff. Ownership and control of the means of production and distribution, capital is money, land, etc., by the community as a whole, usually through a centralized government. It says usually, but I don't know of any that didn't have a centralized government. So this is much different. This is top down. Capitalism, bottom up. Socialism, top down. And crony capitalism is kind of sideways. Who you know. Like it's horizontal. I'm going to go in there and get something because of the political power. So we're going to talk about another word in a minute, and that's communism. Communism and capitalism are intimately linked. So we're going to take them together. It would be impossible to figure out, well, how many of these deaths were caused by communism and how many by socialism, because it's actually a continuum, which we'll talk about in a second. Since 1917, 143 million lives have been lost due to communism and socialism. In the USSR, deaths from 1917 to 1959 under Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin were 66,700,000. From 1959 to 1978, it was another 3 million. In China, from 1949 to 1978, at 784,000. And all but 2 of those years were under Mao Zedong. 2,923,700 German civilians were killed when the Russians entered Germany in 1945 and 1946. That's at the end of the World War II. And this is at the same time that Eisenhower was coming at them. You had the Russians coming from the east, and the Allies, or the European allies coming from the West. So after World War II, World War II was the biggest thing, right? Well, let's take a look at how many deaths were caused by communists and socialists. And think about this. When you call somebody a socialist, you better be pretty sure that they're a socialist. Like if they're running, on the Socialist Party of America ticket for a candidate, yeah, you're a lousy socialist, but don't call them a commie, because you don't know if they espouse that or not. So after World War II, freedom fighters around the world, 4 million of them were killed. Over 1 million Chinese citizens were slaughtered during the first year of Mao's rule, and 14 million over his first 5 years. So this is overlapping a little bit. So he just jumped immediately into, I'm going to kill a bunch of people. And in these places, they would come in and say, okay, well, these are the good people and these are the bad people. And they would start to cart the bad people out, put them on work farms, work them to death, and then eventually they would die, or they'd go, oh yeah, this guy can't work anymore, so we're just going to kill him. And Mao Zedong, he's the top of the hit parade here. He's totaled somewhere between 40 to 80 million deaths. Pol Pot in Cambodia killed 2.5 million of a population of 7 million. So Pol Pot killed 1 of every 3 of his fellow citizens. So what is communism? Communism is a theory or system of social organization. So it's similar to, similar to socialism, because that's the theory or system of social organization. Communism based on the holding of all property in common, actual ownership being ascribed to the community as a whole or to the state. So they're very, very similar. And another one is a system of social organization in which all economic and social activity is controlled by a totalitarian state dominated by a single and self-perpetuating political party. We have a two-party system here. So if you call somebody a communist, you're saying you want a government that's ruled by a tyrant and wants to kill a bunch of people, but also take away all their stuff and then run it from centralized government. So next up is Marxism. And Marxism, if you see here, is indented from communism because Karl Marx was the one that put forth what would become communism. He had a book, well, a couple books, but the most famous one is the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels. So it says here, Marxism is the political, and the reason that I'm even putting Marxism in here is you'll hear people go, oh, you're a Marxist. Well, The political and economic theories of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, later developed by their followers to form the basis for this theory and practice of communism. Socialism, in Marx's theory, the stage following capitalism in the transition of a society to communism. So people that are would-be communists, they want to go to a capitalist country and they want to convert that to a socialist country on the way to becoming a communist country. Characterized by the implementation of collectivist principles. And so collectivist is where it's like, okay, the society as a whole owns everything. It's the collective that owns everything. But as you'll all figure out pretty soon in your life, because two of you are pretty little, everybody's not going to be controlling that. The dictator, the tyrant's going to be controlling it. So next up, for your listening enjoyment, is fascism. That's easy for me to say. Fascism is a governmental system led by a dictator having complete power, forcibly suppressing opposition and criticism, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc., and emphasizing an aggressive nationalism and often racism. So you call somebody a fascist, you're calling them a racist. Here's another one. The philosophy, principles and methods of fascism. I hate when they do that. A political movement that employs the principles and methods of fascism, especially the one established by Mussolini in Italy in 1922 to 1943. Now, what about deaths by fascists? You have the Empire of Japan at a little bit under 6 million died because of fascism. And that was from 1900 to 1945. 1945, of course, is the end of the World War II. During the Spanish Civil War, which was a war that involved fascists versus socialists, there was something called the White Terror. And somewhere between 160,000 and 400,000 people were killed by fascism. Mussolini was the dictator that ran Italy into the ground, literally into the ground. About 1 million people, he caused the deaths of around 1 million people, and a lot of them were in Africa, especially northern Africa. Next up is Nazism. As Winston Churchill called them, Nazis. The Nazis. So what is a Nazi? What is Nazism? A member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which controlled Germany from 1933 to 1945 under Adolf Hitler, and advocated totalitarian government, territorial expansion, anti-Semitism. And like I told you, it's not just anti-Semitism. I read Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf is the book, I forget what, I think it's My Struggle, Mein Kampf. in the German language. Hitler was in prison after World War One, and I think he was in prison when he wrote it. He wrote this book saying, hey, this is what the problem is in Germany, and this is how to solve it. And he laid out in detail who was to blame and what should happen to him. Most people won't read that book, but you should. You should be read, well read. Your reading should be well rounded, and you should not be afraid to read about horrible things, because if you've been doing your homework and you've been keeping your mind open, when you get to a Mein Kampf or the Communist Manifesto or anything like that, I think Chairman Mao had the little red book, and I think I read that way back when. When you get to those things, they'll shock you. You go, no, this is not how the world works. This is dystopia. I should have put utopia and dystopia in here. A dystopian society is one where everything's horrible, where nobody has any freedom, where, like 1984 by George Orwell, there was a camera in everybody's wall, and Big Brother was always watching you, everything that you did. So, and Aryans, let me go through the whole thing again. A member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which controlled Germany from 1933 to 1945 under Adolf Hitler, and advocated totalitarian government, territorial expansion, anti-Semitism, and Aryan supremacy, all these leading directly to World War II and the Holocaust. And Frank, I'm sure you know what the Holocaust is, but Olive and Arlo, it was horrible. They rounded up the Jewish people in the areas that the Germans were in control of, and they put them on box cars, sent them to these camps, and they worked them to death. And then they stopped feeding them as the Germans started to lose the war. They would work them harder. They didn't have food to give them. The people were emaciated. It's just horrible. And then they just put them, they said, okay, go in there, we're going to give you a shower. But they weren't showers, they were gas chambers, and they just killed them. It was just, hopefully in school, Frank, you're done with school, but Olive and Arlo, hopefully they'll show you the horrors of the death camps from the Holocaust. So it says here, and this is very interesting, Nazism, sometimes offensive. A person who, so they're saying sometimes you can use this as pejorative, as as an offensive statement. A person who is fanatically dedicated to or seeks to regulate a specified activity. People use the word Nazi in a funny way. Like in Seinfeld, which is this show that you may or may not ever get to see, but it was just these, and they were all Jewish people that lived in New York. It was the show about nothing. They just lived their lives and had all these interesting discussions and stuff. Well, they loved the soup at this guy's soup at his restaurant. People would line up, long lines of people going in there to get the soup. But if he said the wrong thing, he would go, "No soup for you." He was a guy from, I don't know, maybe Eastern Europe or the Balkans or someplace like that. I don't know what the background of the guy was, but he was the soup Nazi. And you'd wait in line for like 20 minutes, and you get there, and if you said the wrong thing, "No soup for you." And so you call somebody the soup Nazi. And I do it. I do it, but you have to have, what is that, an adjective. You have to be a soup Nazi. Or we had a guy when I worked up in Trenton with the IRS. He ruled the parking lot with an iron fist, and we called him the parking lot Nazi. So that's something that you can do, and it's used to be offensive, but it's used in a certain context, and context is a lot of this whole discussion. You know, you might call somebody a commie, and the person will be mildly disturbed by that just because it hit a note with them of some truth, but you're not screaming commie in their face. So the Nazis killed 21 million people, but actually caused, and that this is definitely overlapping with the Russians and all that kind of stuff, definitely he caused the deaths of, I believe, 100 million people during World War II. So these are governments killing people. Governments. People don't fight wars. Governments fight wars. People don't round up other people and send them to camps and work them to death and kill them and stuff like that. Governments do. And in the 20th century, approximately 262 million people were killed by their governments. It's another reason that I am a libertarian. We're not going to look at libertarian today because it's not part of the discussion. Nobody yells, "Yeah, well, you're a libertarian." But maybe they do. Yeah, I take that back. I've had people go like, "Yeah, you're a libertarian." But let's look at the word liberal. Favorable to progress or reform, as in political or religious affairs. So this is another one where people like to call you a libtard. So you have liberals and conservatives. And I'm both of those things. Most people are both of those things. So a liberal is favorable to progress or reform, as in political or religious affairs. So normally, if you're a religious liberal, you're less religious than a conservative. Like a liberal Christian is like an Episcopalian. There's these light bulb jokes, and it's how many of this does it take to screw in a light bulb, change a light bulb. Well, with Episcopalians, they're very casual, and it's like, how many Episcopalians does it take to change a light bulb? It takes two of them. One to change the bulb, and the other to mix the drinks. So that's like an example of a liberal Christian. But in political meanings, you have liberals and you have progressives. and they are very similar. Progressives are usually more aggressively into reforming society into the vision that they have. And quite often that vision involves centralized government, higher taxes, less capitalism. So there's truth to a certain extent. In, like, we go, oh, you're a liberal. Well, yeah, maybe you should just go, oh, yeah, well, you believe that. Of course you believe that, you're a liberal. You don't have to turn it into a, snarky snap at them. An anonym of, just like progressive is kind of a synonym of liberal, an anonym is reactionary. Reactionary means I'm going to fight you for what you're trying to change. Here's another one. Noting or pertaining to a political party advocating measures of progressive political reform. So progressive liberals are saying, okay, here's the vision that we have of what the future should look like. Everybody should, make about the same amount of money, or everybody should have this level of health care. And then they put forth an action plan, and they try over the years to get closer and closer to that goal. And that's the reform that they think will make things better. And trust me, all these people started out as altruistic believers in these systems that they developed. But a lot of these systems turned into horrible, horrible lives for the people living there. Nazi Germany, before World War II, people thought, oh, this is great, man. This Hitler guy's got us on the right track. Well, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. Now, here's something about liberal that, like, when you hear somebody call somebody else a liberal, it's like, okay, you want centralized government, you want socialized medicine, but a classic liberal is somebody who, I'm a classic liberal. I want free trade. I want especially the freedom of an individual and governmental guarantees of individual rights and liberties. So I'm for reducing the size of government, letting people make their own decisions. I'm for essentially open borders. Now, I'm not for open borders the way we do it now, because we have people coming in and they can get payments from the government. Well, no, we want people to come in to make us richer. We don't want people to come in and then we start giving them handouts, because people are just going to start showing up. So if you say, okay, you have to be an American citizen to get any payments from the government, that's going to cause only people who want to come here and work. Now, of course, there's going to be a safety net. If the person comes here and works and gets sick, gets injured, they're going to be able to go on workman's compensation and stuff like that. But not like, okay, you come here with your family and we're going to, right now they're putting people up in hotels and spending tons of money. Now the new administration coming in is going to be sending the people back out of the country. I don't mind letting them in, just so we're not giving them anything, just so they're contributing. Like, we want them to enrich the tax coffers. We don't want to be pouring money out. Now, that being said, there are people who can apply for asylum, but you have to apply for asylum in the next country from where you live. So we have people from all over the world coming to the United States and going, okay, I'm asking for asylum. Well, no. Like, if you were in Guatemala, you have to go to Mexico or Costa Rica, or one of the bordering countries. You can't come here. Everyone wants to come here because we're like Santa Claus. We're like Santa Claus, who doesn't see you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. We don't care if you're bad or good. We'll give you stuff. But I digress. Favorable to or in accord with concepts of maximum individual freedom possible, especially as guaranteed by law. And that's a big thing. We're a nation of laws. Our freedoms have to be by law. So see, when you say to somebody, well, you're a liberal, you might be saying to them, well, you're for freedom. Right? Which is not, when you yell you're a liberal at somebody, you're not saying they're for freedom. Favoring or permitting freedom of action, especially with respect to matters of personal belief or expression. So we all want to be liberals there. Free from prejudice or bigotry, being tolerant. That's another way of being liberal with somebody. You're taking liberty of the dogma that has arisen around whatever, some race of people or something, and you're going, well, I'm going to set that aside, that dogma that I've always heard, and I'm going to be tolerant. Synonyms are unprejudiced and broad-minded. And antonyms are intolerant. And then you have all the things like, okay, put a liberal amount of sugar in my tea means like, yeah, I want me some sugar in there. Like a liberal amount is a lot. So next, let's look at conservative. I'm also a conservative. Disposed to preserve existing conditions, institutions, etc., or to restore traditional ones, and to limit change. So, and this is the crux of it. Like a conservative Christian doesn't want, like right now, your grandmother and I have just started going to Community Presbyterian in Atlantic Beach. At 9 in the morning, they have a contemporary worship service, and then at 11:30, I think, or no, at 11, they have the traditional service. A progressive, a liberal, they're going to go to that first service. But a conservative, they're going to go to the traditional service because they don't want to see that change. And actually, I would rather go to the conservative service. The liberal service, a lot of times, it's more show than anything else. Liberals and conservatives both have some good ideas about things. So there might be somebody at that first service that gets saved because they're there, because they go like, oh, well, this is pretty modern, so yeah, well, let's do that. But it's not my cup of tea. I'm conservative there. Cautiously moderate or purposely low. You have a conservative estimate. You have like, well, how much is it going to be? Well, give me a conservative estimate of it is the worst case scenario. Traditional in style or manner, avoiding novelty or showiness. So a lot of times when you think of a conservative, you think of somebody who's stodgy and they're proper, like proper English people. There's I'm just skipping the ones that don't really matter. Having the power or tendency to conserve or preserve. So this is a big thing with conservatives. They want to conserve resources, and so do liberals a lot of times. They want to preserve things like the Constitution. They're literal. Usually a liberal is not going to, they're going to say that the Constitution is a living document, and so we should try to bend it and get what we want, and say, yeah, well, the Constitution doesn't say we can't do that. But a conservative is going to say, no, you have to go by the Constitution, and you can't stray from that. So I'm a conservative that way. Yeah, I think that's the last one. That's so let's go on to practical application. What's all this mean? All this stuff that I've been saying here. You want to be able to talk to people, especially people that you disagree with. You need to be able to talk to them and understand them, and be able to shake hands at the end. And we'll think about ways that we can do that. So, here's the question again. Do you really want to call somebody Hitler or a commie? Given what you just found out about what Hitler did, what communists did, do you want to do that? But that's the rhetoric. A shout out here as we get into the practical solution here is a practical application. Shout out to a book called Getting the Yes. I love that book. You should read that book. It's about how to negotiate with people. So you want to attack the position, not the person. See, this is about what they believe, not who they are. The attack of a person is ad hominem. You're attacking the person. I gotta stop for a second. Okay, sorry about that. Your grandmother needed something, so I had to stop. So, anyway, attack the position, not the person. You're discussing what they believe, not who they are. And we conflate that, what you believe is who you are. listen, if you're a real Nazi, then what you believe is who you are. But just normal people walking around. Some are liberals, some are conservatives. Some are Republicans, some are Democrats. A few are libertarian. And there's other parties. But it doesn't mean that, like, okay, you're this, you're a conservative, so you must be stupid. You're a liberal, you must want to take over the world, whatever it is. You want to talk about the positions, not the people. Next up is to show some understanding. I learned this thing one time. I don't know if it was in Getting to Yes or not, where you say to somebody, when they say something to you and you totally disagree with it, instead of going like, you idiot, that's not right, you say things like, that's interesting. I understand why you feel that way. In fact, in the past, you can say, I felt that way. Or, I leaned in that direction. And then I discovered, and I don't believe that anymore. So you're not attacking the person. You're not even attacking the position. You're showing a little bit of empathy, I guess. Like, oh, hey, I disagree with you, but I understand why you believe what you believe. And that goes a long way, showing understanding. Here's another one, fractionation. Is there a part of this that we can agree on? Nobody agrees with Donald Trump 100%. Nobody agrees with Kamala Harris 100%. But is there something that they believe in that I also believe in? And it could be something unrelated to everything else. The most famous one that I'm familiar with was when Jimmy Carter, who was president of the United States back in the 1970s, he brought the Egyptian president and the prime minister of Israel together. So it was Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. Brought them together in Camp David to try to work out peace between the two countries. And they had so much against each other, so many hostilities. I mean, they had fought wars against each other and everything like that. So Carter, he realized that there were some things that had to be solved, like food. The Muslims, and you know this very well, Olive, they have certain dietary laws, and the Jews have certain dietary laws. So everything that the three of them ate, because what you had was a Muslim, a Jew, and a Christian. Jimmy Carter was a born-again Christian, sitting around negotiating. And Carter wanted them to get together, but the two of them, they were hostile to each other. But they could sit there and they could eat food because they could agree on a types of food that all of them could eat. They would pray. They would take turns praying because it's like, well, we're religious, and we can agree on this. And they would pick things off one at a time. And they eventually wound up signing something called the Camp David Accords, which were fairly successful. one of the problems with the Middle East is you have all these rogue organizations. But I believe since the Camp David Accords, there's been no hostilities with the Jews and Egypt, with Israel and Egypt, I should say. Another thing is at the end, you should be able to agree to disagree. You believe that, I believe this. It seems like we're never going to agree on it. So let's just be friends. Why? I mean, right now after every election, there's people who are very, very angry, and there's people that are very, very happy. Those people are in the same families. You have happy and sad people in the same families. The elections in the United States are always in early November. Thanksgiving is in late November, so families get together, and that's what they talk about. Like, oh, this will be an interesting Thanksgiving, meaning that, like, this person's candidate lost and this person's candidate won, so there's going to be this massive struggle there. Well, you should be able to just be friends, be family. Put that aside. A lot of it's just respect for the other person. You call somebody a Nazi, you have no respect for them. No respect. So yeah, it's a human being you're talking to. So be respectful. If you respect somebody, they're way more likely to respect you back. So you have to be the one. In a lot of things, I'm going to be doing one on marriage advice, believe it or not. And part of it is, like, you stay in your own lane. Husbands are supposed to do this. Don't go to your wife and say, hey, you're supposed to be doing this. No, you do you. You do your responsibilities. And then that person will go, oh, I'm not living up to my part of the bargain here. And they'll start doing their part of it. So, and that's the biggest thing, that these pejoratives being tossed around are just horrible. I mean, think about it. Oh, you're just like Hitler. You're just like somebody who rounded people up and put them in concentration camps and killed them. There is a silver lining to this whole thing. Anyway, I got interrupted by your grandmother. I've been trying to get this thing done all day, and she just keeps coming in. So the silver lining is the new media. When I was a little kid, there were 3 TV stations, and politics could be rough and tumble, but when cable TV came out, that upped it. There became left-wing TV networks and right-wing TV networks. So the left-wingers would be on the side of the Democrats and the right-wingers would be on the side of the Republicans. And what winds up happening is you want your side to win. So when say you're a Democrat going on Fox News, which is right-wing, it's leans Republican, and you're a Democrat, they're going to ask you tough questions. But if you're a Republican, they go, hey, so what was it like, visiting Niagara Falls? They're going to ask you things that are easy to answer. And even in debates, you have these presidential debates, and if it's on a left-wing station, they're going to go in there and tell the moderators are going to, instead of letting the debate happen between the people, the moderators are going to go in and stop the candidate and go, no, you know that's wrong. Well, in this election, the new, and we're talking about Gen X and millennial, new media took over. And it's a wonderful thing. Donald Trump went on Joe Rogan, sat there for 3 hours. Now, normally, if you're going to hear sound bites by people. Politicians want to tell you what they want you to hear, and they don't want you to know what they believe in that you don't like. But if you sit there for 3 hours with somebody, they're going to, and Joe Rogan doesn't talk a lot about politics. He's a Bernie bro. He's somebody who's a progressive, liberal, Democrat, but he keeps politics out of it for the most part. Now, when he talked to Trump, he was asking questions about politics and about positions that he had, but it's a discussion. It's not an argument. Quite often on the mainstream media, the media that we've had for the last, 50 years now, since cable came out, is people arguing, screaming over each other. But this is just two people talking. And Kamala Harris went on something called Call Her Daddy, which I'm not really familiar with. I listen to Rogan from time to time. I watched Trump on Rogan and his vice president. So, but Call Her Daddy is the same kind of thing, but a lot of women and girls watch that, and a lot of men and boys watch things like Joe Rogan. But this is wonderful because you can sit there and find out about this person. You can find out, what they do for leisure. I've learned so many interesting things about a whole bunch of people that you never would know because they put up a facade. They go yeah, I'm back here, but I want you to see what I'm putting in front of you, not me. Well, this causes them to have to be real people. And I hope that continues into the future. And the reason that I say that is because there's a famous line to a Grateful Dead song that says, every silver lining has a touch of gray. So the original expression was, every storm cloud has a silver lining, but every lining has a touch of gray. And the touch of gray is that as these new medias start to grow, there's more advertising. And that's one of the problems with the mainstream media is the advertisers are people who have a political interest. So they only want people on there that help them. You don't advertise on a show just to advertise. When it's something like this, you advertise to get people to buy your product, but also to get the people on there to push your product. Big pharmaceutical companies are doing that. Big agriculture companies. There's I don't think defense contractors that start wars that they're doing it. This is in mainstream media. Now, they're starting to get a lot of advertisements on the new media. Something like Joe Rogan never has one. But a lot of them have, YouTube will put some ads in there every once in a while. And then the podcast itself will say, oh, well, today is brought to you by such and so. And normally it's like some solar generator for your house or, it could be anything. But it doesn't have to be somebody trying to make a political point. But that will happen. They will try. The people that want to control our lives, control what we put into it, control what we do, they try to take over everything. It's called capturing. So they've captured the mainstream media, and they're going to try to capture this. Will it happen? I don't know. Anyway, don't call people Nazis. Don't call people commies. Now that you know what those things mean, and the horrible things that those movements have done over history, 265 million people dead. It's crazy. Anyway, peace out. Hey, no balloons.